Do you believe that a human being could sit still in a sea of fire without uttering a single cry of pain? On June 11, 1963, at a crowded intersection in Saigon, Vietnam, a Zen master sat down and lit the flame of his own life. He remained unmoving, like a mountain in the heart of a storm of fire. Some stories, from the very first moment you hear them, you pause. Not because they are shocking, not because they are strange, but because something inside you softens, and suddenly you find yourself slowing down, like when you see a flame burning, but somehow your heart does not tremble. Today we speak of a flame, but not just any flame. Not the kind that blazes and turns to ash, not the kind that destroys. This is the kind of flame that illuminates, that burns quietly, in the soul, long before anyone sees it with their eyes. When people mention the name Thich Quang Duc, they often think of one moment. A monk, sitting cross-legged at a busy intersection in Saigon, calmly setting himself on fire. Not moving, not speaking, simply sitting while flames wrapped around his body. That moment happened on June 11, 1963. But the truth is, the fire did not begin there. The real flame had been burning for much longer. It started with a child, a boy whom later generations would call Zen Master Thich Quang Duc. His birth name was Lam Van Tuc. He was born in 1897 in Hoi Can village in the Van Ninh district of Con Hoa province, a quiet land by the sea in central Vietnam. His family were simple farmers. Life was harsh, as it often is in places where the earth is dry and the wind carries the salt of the ocean inland. But hardship was not what shaped his heart the most. Loss did. When he was still very young, his mother passed away. Some say that was the first moment the boy truly tasted impermanence. Not in theory, but in his bones. At night, he would sit beside his father, staring at the small oil lamp flickering on the altar. Its tiny flame swayed in the breeze. Sometimes it almost went out. Sometimes it danced back to life. The boy would sit there quietly, not asking why his mother was gone, not crying loudly like other children might, just sitting, watching the light. And perhaps in that silent space, something shifted inside him. When he turned 7, his father brought him to the Hoi Can temple. There, the boy was entrusted to a monk named Hoa Thuong Hoang Tum. It was a small temple, hidden near the foot of a mountain. Not a grand pagoda, not a famous place, just a humble refuge for those who wish to practice quietly. On the day of his ordination, the boy carried almost nothing with him. Just a simple brown robe, and a mind untouched by fame or ambition. People in the village whispered stories about him. Some said his teacher, Hoa Thuong Hoang Tum, once dreamed of a small flame rising from the child's hands. The flame in the dream burned brightly. Yet it didn't harm the skin. It didn't leave a scar. When the teacher awoke, he said nothing. But from that day on, he watched the boy more closely. That story has been told for generations, passed from one monk to another, from elders to children. It may be a legend, or it may not, but some stories are not meant to be proven. They are meant to be listened to with the heart. At 15, Lam Van Tuc received the Sati precepts. At 20, he became a full bhikkhu, a fully ordained monk. And then he made a choice that surprised no one who knew him well. He asked permission to leave the temple, not to go into the world, but to withdraw further from it. He went up to Nui Dat, the Earth Mountain in Ninh Hoa. There, he built himself a tiny hut out of bamboo and leaves. And for 3 years, he lived alone. No titles, no sermons, no audience, just breath and silence. People say that during those years, he ate only leaves, drank water from the stream. He sat in meditation from dawn until nightfall. And when night came, he continued to sit, villagers sometimes passed by the foot of the mountain. They said that on some nights they saw a soft light glowing from his hut, but they knew there was no lantern inside, no firewood, no candles. They called it the meditation flame. Some believed it was real. Others thought it was just something the mind imagines when it wants to see purity in the world. But no one dared disturb him. They simply placed offerings of rice and vegetables near the path, then walked away quietly. There are stories of elders who during the rainy season saw smoke rising from the hut even when no fire was lit, like incense carried by the wind. Whether this is true or not, no one knows for sure. And perhaps it does not matter, because the value of a story is not always in its facts. Sometimes it's in the space it opens inside us when we listen. After 3 years of seclusion, the monk came down from the mountain. He looked the same as before, but those who met his eyes said something had changed. His gaze was deeper, but softer. He no longer saw the world as heavy. He no longer clung to right or wrong, gain or loss. He looked at people and saw only compassion. He looked at life and saw only impermanence. From then on, he continued his practice quietly. He traveled across central Vietnam, built temples, helped communities. Later, he moved to Saigon. He took part in the Buddhist Sangha's leadership, guided many disciples. But even then, he kept his simplicity. He never sought fame, never cared for power, never collected followers like trophies. He lived like a small lamp in the corner of a dark room, not to draw attention, just to keep the flame alive. And perhaps that is why, when the time came to let go of his body, he could do it so calmly. But that part of the story will come later. For now, if you are listening to this, perhaps in the stillness of the night, all you need to hold in your mind is this: a child sitting quietly by the altar, staring at the small oil lamp flickering in the dark, watching the flame rise and fall again and again. And from that moment onward, a different kind of flame began to grow in his heart, a flame that would never burn out, a flame that even now still lights the way for those who dare to let go. When a monk comes down from the mountain, the world often expects him to return with teachings or to proclaim enlightenment. But Thich Quang Duc did not come down to speak. He came down simply to walk. He stepped softly onto the earth, just as he had before, with no need to announce that anything had changed. Yet those who met his gaze knew it had. The years of seclusion had left a trace, not in his robes, not in his posture, but in his eyes. There was something in them, a softness but also a clarity, as if he had seen through life and death and returned with nothing to prove. After leaving his solitary retreat, he began traveling across central Vietnam. He did not seek fame or followers. He did not build temples to leave behind his name. He built them because people needed a place to return to silence. Among the temples he helped construct was Thien Loc Pagoda, a small sanctuary tucked away from the noise of the world, built not from ambition but from compassion. Village by village, town by town, he offered his presence. He repaired roofs, taught meditation to those who asked, listened to farmers and fishermen tell their worries, not with advice but with silence that healed more than words could. He accepted no titles. Yet within the Lam Tzen lineage, what in the West is called the Rinzai school, he was recognized as a master. He belonged to the 42nd generation of Lam Te and the 9th generation of the Chuk Then line, a Vietnamese Zen tradition that had carried the lamp of mindfulness for centuries. But to him these numbers meant little. What mattered was the practice. What mattered was keeping the flame alive. People still whisper stories about him. They say that when Thich Quang Duc sat in meditation, he could sit for hours, perfectly still. Birds would land on his shoulders. Snakes would crawl past his feet, and he remained motionless. as if his body had become part of the earth itself. Some said he meditated through storms. Others said he sat so quietly, even the wind forgot to blow. Whether these tales are literal or not does not change their meaning. Sometimes the truth of a story is not in the surface, but in the space it opens inside us when we listen. In 1934, he moved to Saigon. At that time, Saigon was growing fast. Shops, markets, cars, lights. A city spinning in the rush of modern life. But even there, amid the rising noise, Thich Quang Duc continued his quiet path. He helped build more temples, more than 30 across southern Vietnam. Again, not for his own name, for the Sangha, for the people. He became a respected figure in the Buddhist Sangha of Vietnam, but he never carried himself as an important man. He lived simply. He ate little. He always chose the seat in the corner. In the mornings, he chanted sutras softly, his voice barely louder than a breath. In the afternoons, he swept the temple grounds, lifting each fallen leaf as if it were a prayer. When night fell, he meditated alone, sometimes under the moon, sometimes beneath the dim light of a single oil lamp. The world outside was beginning to change. By the early 1960s, Vietnam was caught in the turbulence of history. The country was divided, north and south, communism and anti-communism, fear and propaganda. In the south, under President Ngo Dinh Diem, the Buddhist community faced growing oppression. Though the majority of the people were Buddhist, the government favored Catholicism. Pagodas were monitored. Monks were harassed. Flags were banned during Vesak, the Buddha's birthday. The pain of the people grew silently. But silence has its limits. Thich Quang Duc watched all of this with the same calm he had always kept. He did not protest loudly. He did not write angry letters or give fiery speeches. He simply observed. But there comes a time when compassion is no longer just about personal practice. Sometimes compassion must become action. In Buddhist texts, there is the image of the Bodhisattva who hears the cries of the world. And when the suffering becomes too deep, the Bodhisattva steps forward, not out of anger, but out of love. Thich Quang Duc's life was like that. He had lived quietly for decades, practicing, serving, building temples, teaching without teaching. But now, as he witnessed the suffering of his people, he understood what must be done. Not to cause chaos, not to fuel violence, but to offer the most profound teaching of all, the teaching of sacrifice. He chose the path that no one else wanted to walk, to offer his own body, to become a living sutra. The monks around him tried to dissuade him. They wept. They begged. But Thich Quang Duc's decision was already made. Made not in haste, but in the stillness of meditation. Some say he had known it for a long time, that the years of silence on the mountain had prepared him for this moment. In his eyes, death was not an ending. It was another offering. There are no records of his private thoughts before that day. No diary entries. No long letters left behind. Only stories told by those who knew him. They say he was serene. That in his final days he smiled more often than usual. That his steps became even lighter, as if he had already let go of his own weight. And so the monk who once sat still while birds nested on his shoulders, now prepared to sit still in the greatest fire of all. Not to destroy, but to awaken. Not to protest with anger, but to teach with compassion. Because sometimes the deepest silence is not in the mountains. It is in the moment when one gives up everything and remains peaceful within. But that part of the story will come next. For now, all you need to remember is this: a life lived quietly, a heart that carried no resentment, and a flame that had been waiting, not to burn the world, but to illuminate it from within. Some mornings do not arrive like others. Some mornings carry a silence that feels heavier, softer, deeper, as if the air itself already knows what is about to happen. June 11th, 1963 was one of those mornings. Saigon woke up early. Vendors unfolded their baskets of vegetables. Children tugged at their mothers' sleeves, asking for breakfast. The city began its usual hum, unaware of what was about to unfold. But somewhere in that city, a monk was preparing for something that no one else could imagine. Thich Quang Duc rose gently, as he did every day. His steps were calm. His hands did not tremble. He folded his saffron robe with care, not like someone preparing for a grand ceremony, but like someone preparing for an ordinary day. Yet for him, this day was not ordinary. It was the day he would offer his body as a teaching, not to curse anyone, not to terrify, but to show the world something that words could no longer reach. He stepped into the car in silence. Other monks sat beside him, their palms damp with quiet nervousness. But his hands remained steady. The car moved through the streets of Saigon, weaving between bicycles and old buses. Life continued as usual, unaware of the lesson that was about to begin. At the intersection of Phan Dinh Phung and Le Van Duit, now called Nguyen Dinh Chiu and Kach Mang Thang Tam, the car came to a stop. Monks and lay people had already gathered. They unfurled banners. They chanted for religious equality, for compassion, for an end to oppression. But Thich Quang Duc did not hold a banner. He did not chant slogans. He simply stepped out of the car, moving softly, as if stepping into a meditation hall. In the center of the crossroads, he placed a small cushion on the asphalt. Then he sat down, crossed his legs in the lotus position, pressed his palms together in front of his chest. Some say his eyes closed gently, like a man preparing to rest. Others say his eyes remained half open, still and focused, resting softly on the world in front of him. Another monk stepped forward and poured gasoline over his body. It soaked through his robes, through his skin. But Thich Quang Duc did not flinch. Then with his own hands, he struck a match. The flames rose quickly. They wrapped around his robes. They kissed his skin. They climbed over his shoulders. But his body did not move, not a muscle. His face remained calm. His posture stayed steady, like a mountain sitting inside a fire. People around him gasped. Some fell to their knees, hands pressed together in silent prayer. Some covered their mouths, eyes wide, unable to understand what they were seeing. A few monks cried quietly, but no one tried to stop him. They knew this was not a moment for intervention. This was a teaching. The flames rose higher. Still, he sat. No screams, no cries, not even a single whisper of pain. Some said the scent in the air was not of burning flesh, but of incense, that the smoke carried something sweet, not bitter, that even in the fire there was peace. Whether that is true or not, no one can say for sure. But those who were there swore it was so. And the story has never left their lips since. A journalist named Malcolm Browne stood nearby. He held his camera, sent only to cover a protest. He did not expect to witness this. His hand shook slightly as he pressed the shutter. Click, click, click. Each frame captured what the world had never seen before. A human being sitting in the heart of a fire without fear. The photographs would travel across the world. They appeared on the front pages of newspapers. They flashed across television screens. People who had never heard of Vietnam saw the image. They paused. Some turned away, unable to bear the sight. Others stared for minutes, searching for meaning. It was not an act of violence. It was not a protest of hatred. It was something else. A message without words. A body offered, not taken. A teaching written in flame. Across the globe, the image of Thich Quang Duc became a symbol. For some, it stood for resistance. For others, it stood for compassion without limits. For many, it was the first time they asked themselves, what does it mean to let go of the body while keeping the heart at peace? How can someone sit so still, When their own skin burns, in the days and weeks that followed, governments met in conference rooms. Journalists wrote articles. Politicians argued over meanings and consequences. But the monk himself, he said nothing more. His teaching had already been given. In the Buddhist texts, there is the image of the fire of wisdom, a flame that burns away illusion, not with destruction, but with clarity. That day, in the middle of a Saigon street, people saw what that meant. The fire touched Thich Quang Duc's skin, but it did not seem to touch his mind. His mind remained vast, still, clear. Some say the place where he sat still holds the memory of that moment. That if you walk by late at night, you can feel a subtle warmth, not from the ground, but from the lesson that lingers in the air. Others say, when the wind shifts, a faint trace of incense still drifts through the streets of Saigon. A gentle breath, a silent prayer. Perhaps these are just stories, or perhaps they are reminders that some moments in life do not fade with time, because what happened that day was not about death. It was about life, about choosing with full awareness to offer oneself, not out of anger, but out of love. Thich Quang Duc did not sacrifice himself to make others feel guilty. He did it to awaken the hearts of those who had forgotten how to feel. And for many, he succeeded. The photograph remains. But more importantly, so does the question it leaves behind. What does it truly mean to be free? When the flames finally dimmed, the monks and lay people bowed deeply, their palms pressed together in silent reverence. They bowed not out of grief, but as an invitation, a sacred gesture, respectfully inviting Zen master Thich Quang Duc to accompany them back to Jaloi Pagoda. It was not about carrying remains. It was a ceremonial act of devotion, a way of acknowledging that his teaching was still unfolding even after the fire. With quiet hands and steady hearts, they brought his body to Jaloi, the place where generations had gathered before to chant, to pray, and to remember the Dharma. At Jaloi Pagoda, the monks prepared for the cremation, not as a final farewell, but as an offering, returning the body to the elements: earth, water, wind, fire. They built the funeral pyre with great care, each piece of wood placed gently, each motion mindful. When the flames rose again, no one looked away. They watched, calm and present, their voices steady in soft chanting. This was not a time for tears. This was a time for understanding. For Zen master Thich Quang Duc, this was not an ending. It was a continuation. When the flames receded, only ashes remained. But in the center of the ashes, the monks discovered something extraordinary. There, untouched by fire, lay his heart, whole, intact. The body had returned to dust, but the heart remained. Some called it a miracle. Others saw it as a message. Perhaps it was both. Because love, true compassion, cannot be burned. The monks lifted the heart gently, placing it into a sacred vessel, not as a relic of bone or ash, but as a living teaching. A heart that says, even when the body is gone, compassion remains. The heart was later entrusted to the State Bank of Vietnam, kept safe through years of conflict and change. Today it remains preserved in Vietnam, not as an object of worship, but as a symbol, a sarira of the heart, a relic of boundless love. When the world learned of this heart that would not burn, many paused. Some tried to explain it. Some debated its meaning, but most simply bowed, because some lessons are beyond explanation. They are meant to be felt. Zen master Thich Quang Duc did not leave behind gold or statues. He left a heart that survived fire, a heart that refuses to turn to ash. In Buddhism, the heart is not just flesh. It is the seat of compassion, the center of kindness. To leave behind a heart is to leave behind love itself. Elders whisper stories about the heart. They say it remains because the world is still learning. As long as there is ignorance, the heart stays. A quiet reminder that love is stronger than hatred. Some say that if you walk past the old intersection at night, the very place where Zen Master Thich Quang Duc sat in flames, you might hear chanting in the wind. Not loud, not clear, just a soft murmur, as if the air itself remembers. Maybe it is just a story. Or maybe it is the earth breathing, carrying the echo of compassion forward. Because this was never about death. It was about life, about stillness in the fire, about love that cannot be destroyed. Zen Master Thich Quang Duc did not burn to protest life. He burned to remind us how to live, to let go of ego, to let go of clinging, but to keep the heart, to keep compassion. He left his heart behind, not for himself, but for the world. Tonight, as you listen to this story, perhaps you are wondering, what is the part of me that the fire cannot burn? What remains when everything else is gone? Some stories are not for solving. They are for carrying, like a small flame that lives quietly in the chest, like a heart that refuses to turn to ash.